Hello everyone and welcome to Threes to Wound. My name's Reese and we're back for another tactical battle report. A battle report with just a little bit more of a twist. We talk a little bit more in depth about my thought process, the tactics going through my head, things that are happening in my brain hole while it's happening in the game. Hopefully this will give you a little bit of an insight into, different ways to play the game, and also encourage you guys to get involved in the comments as well. Tell me which tactics you liked, which ones you didn't, other ways you can go about things, and even talking about my opponent and their tactics and ways to overcome what they're doing as well. Today we've got a classic matchup. It is Chaos in Chaos Land. It's the Chaos Space Marines of the Black Legion versus the Death Guard. So this is a bit of a classic, fisticuffs between two of the Dark God's finest. A few little caveats before we kick the game off, just so you guys are aware and you don't need to chuck it in the comments below. Yes, my Chaos Space Marines are not 100% completed in their paint jobs, and some of the terrain isn't done yet as well. So I do apologize. In the future, all my models I play in games with, I'll do my best to make sure are painted. So please forgive me. We're not playing the points for paint in the game as well. So there won't be the two bonus points. This isn't me cheating just because my opponent's models are painted and mine aren't. That's just because we don't usually do that. We're just keen to get the dice rolling, but in future, we'll make sure they're looking their best. One other thing to note, I was using Battle Scribe for this game as well when I was playing instead of just using the books like normal. It did lead to a little mistake with the Chaos Cultist Gunner models being listed as GA2 when, according to the book and the compendium and every other source I could find, I couldn't see in any FAQs. They haven't been changed from the one GA that they are in the book. So apologies, there is that little mistake just there. If I was accidentally correct or Battle Scribe was actually correct, let me know in the comments below. They usually are really, really good. Everything's usually spot on. So I may have missed something in my searching to correct and get the right answer. So please let me know. So as always, the first place to start is to pick the mission, and today we went with Awaken the Data Spirits, something I've wanted to play for a little while now. We did make a little bit of a mistake when initially starting the game with these rules, and I'll explain that as it happens, but we got it right in the end. First up, it's all about, you can see there's sort of two lots of objectives in little, triangles there. 2 firewall tokens on A, and then an uplink on A. Then there's uplink on B with 2 firewalls. You spend an AP to disconnect one of those firewalls, and each time you do that, that gets you a victory point. And then the other way you just score the points is at the end of the turning point. For each uplink marker you control, you score victory points as follows. If both of the uplinks firewall objective markers have been removed, you score 2 victory points. If one of the uplink firewall markers has been removed from the kill zone, you score 1. And if none of them, you don't score any. So without disconnecting the firewalls, those uplink terminals are actually useless. So it's all about getting to them first. Initially, my opponent and I thought that you could keep doing that each turn. You had to keep disconnecting them each time. Each turn they would reboot, I guess. Incorrect. It did affect some of the choices we made in our operative selection with that in mind, but it didn't actually affect the overgame. It was just a little bit of a misread on our part in our enthusiasm to get into the game. With that enthusiasm well in hand, we now decided to set up the terrain, and you can see here we went for a bit of a, destroyed industrial area with lots of Mechanicus structures, some pipe work, some cargo containers. I really wanted to create a bit of a mixture of having some light terrain that sort of intersected the battlefield at lots of points, but also wanted to make sure we had a number of vantage points that had, interesting points of view. We wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to be a traditional sniper battle. We wanted to have options for shooters, but also options for close combat. And this mission type definitely led towards it being a very close engagement. Those objectives feel very, very close together once you drop the terrain down. A lot of the vantage points too were great for looking over those important objectives, but they were also very open in the other way as well. We also had a few little bits of scattered terrain there, some vehicles which were also light, and you can see the cargo containers in the back there. The one cargo container up was considered just a vantage point. The next cargo container up was a punishing vantage point. That also goes for those 2 platforms on the Imperial buildings there as well. We rolled to see who would be the defender and the attacker. Luckily for me, and I guess in some ways I actually hate picking my own deployment zone. I don't know how you guys feel about it, but I'm not a huge fan of it. but I did win that. So the Chaos Space Marines were going to be picking their deployment zone. I picked the top left of the battlefield here because mainly I thought it had the best access and defense. There was one objective I could get to quite easily on that left side, and it actually was behind a wall, so it was protected, and then I thought I'd be able to push through potentially as well. It also gave me a good sort of setup of not having too much light terrain trying to slow me down as I pushed into the center. So I was really looking forward to that paying off to give me a bit more maneuverability, because against the Death Guard, that was going to be my greatest strength. So today we've gone the Black Legion, and I'm pretty excited. I really like the Chaos Space Marines in this new edition. They feel pretty good. They're a compendium team, so they don't have all the bells and whistles just yet. There's a little catch though. I do have a thing where I really love running the Cultists. It's not the best idea. They're not great by any stretch of the imagination. The matchup today is against the Death Guard, so what I'm really trying to maximize in this game is my maneuverability and my ability to get to objectives, especially secondary TacOps and things like that I know with the right positioning using those said cultists, the Death Guard won't really be able to counter that. The other thing I've got to keep in mind as well though is I've still got to play the main mission objective. So it's a bit of a trade-off, but I'm hoping the fact that I will be able to score a lot of my TacOps, they'll be able to score very few of theirs, and then if I can use my few Space Marines the correct way, I should maximize my ability to score points on the primary as well. First up, it's my leader. Now, this guy is going to be the absolute linchpin of this team. I really need to get the most out of him and make him, I guess, my most damaging and also concerning target for my opposition. It's all about using him in the right way. He's going to have the plasma pistol, obviously the best sort of pistol weapon you can take to be really, really damaging, especially against the forces of Nurgle. I would have loved to have taken a power fist. Unfortunately, as modeled, I don't have one at the moment. I will look into that. So next up, it's the Power Sword, which is still fantastic, lethal 5+. This guy I'm really going to use as a bit of an assassin model, hopefully using his 3 AP to the best of its effect. So hopefully shooting a model and then possibly charging him and getting him to finish off some targets. Really going to use him as the main operative to hold the uplink on my side and make the Nurgle boys have to work across the board to come his way. The catch will be trying to find the right amount of cover to help make sure that he's at his best in close combat as well, which I know he's going to end up there. I've given him some equipment. First up, I went for Grizzly Trophy. So this basically means any operatives that are within square, subtract 1 from their attacks characteristics of ranged and melee weapons. So hoping to minimize their ability to shift him off objectives, and meaning if they do choose to charge me, I'm sort of putting them at a bit of a disadvantage. The other one was the Sacrificial Dagger. This is another great one because it's one of the few ways to regain wounds. But once you incapacitate an enemy operative in combat, you can regain 4 wounds. So I'm hoping that it ends up a little bit of operatives charge me and I can counter-attack using the lethal 5+ to do a lot of damage, kill those operatives, and then heal up, ready to go again. Next guy on the team was the Chaos Space Marine Icon Bearer. There's really no reason not to take an Icon Bearer when you're taking a Marines team, because it's basically just giving one of your normal Marine guys an extra bit of equipment that can be really, really valuable. In this case, the biggest strength was having the banner, which actually increased the operative's APL in terms of controlling objectives. So this was going to possibly be really crucial as the fight went on. We're going to be fighting over really tightly congested objectives. So this can be a great little one just to tip the balance in your favor, especially towards the end of a turn if you can hold off activating this operative. It's a bit of a catch-22 though, because at the same time he's also got the Icon of Vengeance, which basically is letting you turn one of your failed hits into a normal hit if you get a critical once activated. And this is obviously something you'd want to be usually activating earlier in the phase. The only issue again here, and why one of the things that hurts about taking Cultists, it doesn't affect them, it purely affects just your Marines. And in a team that's only got 3 Marines, it's not a huge benefit, especially if they have to spread out a little bit. To make sure I was maximizing the effectiveness of each of the Marines, I gave this guy just the bolter because I don't really want him to engage in close combat. He's more a support / objective holder, but I did want ways for him to be able to clear people off objectives. So I gave him Belt Feed, which gives his bolter the ceaseless special rule, so handy for giving you a little bit more chance to hit. I also did Malefic Rounds to add some potential AP to the weapons as well. So hopefully, just might be able to push those guys off objectives by hitting a bit more consistently, and that AP rule, especially against the Death Guard, anything you can do to add some extra damage to them is going to be a big bonus. The last guy, you know him, you love him. It's the guy you kind of have to take, but you're not too sad about it. It's the plasma gun, especially with only 3 Marines in the team. Having this guy with the power to literally delete units, even Death Guard, in one strike is pretty powerful. So never leave home without a plasma gun. I like to say the duality of having this as well as having the plasma pistol, that's a lot of plasma for 3 Marines, and the increased equipment on the bolter guy. I feel like all 3 of my Marines have lots of threat output they can do. It's just about keeping them alive and using them at the right times. Let's have a look now at the party boys of this list. It's the Chaos Cultists. Yes, they arrive in hordes unnumbered, and by that I mean I think there's like 6 of them, but it's still a lot. This is definitely not an optimized team. If I was going to get the most out of my Chaos team, I'd definitely be taking the further 3 Marines. That would still give me the outnumber advantage, having 6 Marines compared to the Death Guard's 5, but I really do like trying to find ways to win and unique ways to play the game, and Cultists really let you do that. I also really love the thematic feel of the Chaos Space Marine overlords commanding the minions or their plebs, sending them into battle to die for the Dark Gods. So that's why I find the flavor of the Chaos Cultist works really, really well. And I'm hoping in the near future, maybe this next box set that comes out, that they'll get their moment to shine. Because at the moment, they're severely hamstrung by not really having access to many strategic or tactical ploys, which really hurts them. And their equipment, loadouts are pretty mundane or pretty safe. So I'm not expecting these guys to become superhuman, but definitely finding ways that maybe the Chaos Space Marines can inspire or empower their minions to make them more dangerous. The biggest strengths these guys have is GA2 and knowing that we're going to outnumber them. When looking at the weapon loadout for these guys, obviously it's a toss-up between the close combat version or the auto gun. I chose the close combat and auto pistol because I thought this map is going to be really, really tight and small. I'm actually really wanting to use my guys to either push to the extreme edges of the boards and the flanks to, capture those TacOps that I'm hoping to get when I deal out my deck. But also, I don't really need their shooting. The damage that they may or may not do with auto guns from long range is probably not that high. So I think the strength here for these guys is I actually want to use opportunities to charge them into combat to slow down the Death Guard further, to pick units, pick them off at the flanks, slow them down and keep them off objectives, and also stop them from being able to bring their superior Marine numbers to bear on my Marines. So hopefully we'll see a lot of that I'll be charging these guys in, holding up the Death Guard as much as possible, but then also using their ability to spread out and also their ability to infiltrate to score victory points on my TacOps very, very early. Last but not least, it's the 2 Chaos Gunners. These guys do add a little bit of extra firepower, and I'm definitely interested in seeing the Flamer go to work over those objectives, and that'll be my plan, to definitely get him up early, overlooking the objectives that I'm trying to lock down and be a little bit of a safety net. He's obviously not going to kill a Marine in one go, but he definitely could be the difference maker in clearing them off objectives, taking off those last few wounds, or even just softening up an opponent before I do make another charge. The guy with the stubber, he's got lots of shots. He's a little bit inaccurate, but I will be using him just to hold down a little bit of territory. Maybe getting a good firing lane so the Death Guard do have to worry about where they can finish their moves. We'll see what we can do with it. My opponent today playing the Death Guard is Dan, someone who's played quite a bit with the Death Guard, but has had a little bit of a break. He's been playing a lot of Drakari, so a little bit of a mental gear change to come back to these guys. I was quite confident he wasn't going to go with the Poxwalkers in this list as well. Having played against him many times when they haven't performed that well, I definitely think they're not that strong for the Death Guard, and you're definitely much better set going for 5 of the much more stronger Nurgle Marines. The first 3 selections in his team were actually a really big mirror for my guys. We had the Plasma Gunner there, we had a Marine with a bolt gun, he's carrying the banner, and we had the Leader Operative. Big difference there being, though, he had the Power Fist that I was really hoping to equip on my guy. That's where it must have got to, obviously. This is good and bad. Good that I'm able to match those 3 guys, but I guess it means then these extra 2 Marine operatives don't really have a counter in the cultists that I've got. He'd also equipped the leader with the Plague Bell. Now, this is one of my least favorite things to come up against, because it really takes away one of the biggest disadvantages of playing Death Guard, and that is that you're pretty slow. This bell basically gives everyone within pentagon range of the leader the ability to move back to that circle movement. And it only costs the leader 1 APL. And when you're in a team full of guys who are 3 APL, that hurts a little bit. But I guess the functionality of it amongst your team and the big improvement, as you'll see at the start of this game, is really, really powerful. So one of those main weaknesses is mitigated straight away with just a little bit of careful planning. Next up, it's a regular bolt gun. We call this guy Pretty Fly because, well, you can see that from the look of him. Both this guy and the Banner Bearer, or as we call him, Eric Banner, both have mephitic toxin and virulent rounds for their bolt guns. The last operative he chose was the Plague Marine Fighter, equipped with a Great Plague Cleaver. Some of these things are a little bit of a tongue twister. This guy had one mission, and that was to cut my Chaos Space Marines in half. So straight out of the gate, this was one operative I was a little bit nervous about, especially if he got on those objectives, trying to shift him off there while still worrying about the long range threat of things like the plasma and those quite powerful bolters. Getting rid of this guy was going to definitely be a bit of a priority. With the TacOps, I had one thing in mind, and that was using my numbers to score as many points as possible. To help with this, I chose Recon as my place to start. The first one up, Triangulate, was one that I was very confident I could get 1 victory point for very quickly and very easy, using a few little cultist tricks to secure one early. There was another one I knew that the Death Guard wouldn't be able to get to. The last one was probably the most troublesome, and that was the one within the Death Guard deployment zone, but I had a few tricks to try and distract them to get them out of their deployment zone. Next up was Plant Signal Beacon, and this kind of worked hand in hand with what I was trying to do with Triangulate by making sure the Death Guard were moving all the way out of their deployment zone, which they had to do to get those objectives. I was hoping to use a little bit of a pincer formation with my cultists to make sure that at least one side of my cultists would be able to get to within that pentagon of the enemy deployment zone to plant the signal beacon. The last one was Vantage Point, and I thought this was another great one to get. There was 2 good vantage zones to grab that followed the rules of being blue square out of my deployment zone, but still close enough that I thought I could grab them quickly and early before the Death Guard could get to them, and also keep those operatives up there alive as well, so they weren't throwing away operatives for the sake of victory points. Usually I'd recommend that, but in this game I was going to need those cultists to hang around. As far as my opponent's TacOps were going, I had a feeling he was going to be going Seek and Destroy, just because it suited the way the Death Guard want to play. It also suited the fact that they were going to be pushing forward and knowing that I was going to have lots of soft bodies trying to hold them up. Was I correct? Well, you'll find out. We both placed our barricades and had some similar ideas, both using our barricades to secure those objectives closest to us and make sure we had some form of cover while we were getting those early, or to make sure it was going to be a little bit more difficult for enemy operatives to get there. I also placed one at the far side of that terrain on that lower left-hand side of the battlefield there. Basically, I had a little bit of a plan of where I could get some potential shooters to make that flank a little bit more vulnerable to the enemy. As the defender, I was the lucky one. I got to set up first. The other reason I hate having to pick my deployment zone is I always panic about getting the right one. In case you pick it wrong, you look silly. But so you have to set up first. So I always love being able to counter deploy, getting a bit of an insight into what my opponent's thinking. In this case, I had to reveal my hand a little bit. So you can see here the first units to go down were 3 cultists on that left flank. These guys each had different objectives. There was the one guy on the far left. His job was to climb up on those vantage points on the crates there really quickly, and hopefully by turn 2 be on the far side of the one that I could claim as a vantage point. The flamer was there to then push forward towards the middle uplink objective, hopefully using either the door or the windows there to be able to overlook it, but stay in a little bit of cover and out of danger until the Death Guard got close enough to be an issue. The last guy, well, he was a safety net. Number 1 was his job to get that first of the firewalls, if he could get there. It was also his job as well to look at doing the plant beacon action as well as the game continued, if the Death Guard didn't push this side. So straight away, those 3 guys had a little bit to do. On that right-hand flank of my deployment zone, more cultists were going down, and again, they each kind of had mission objectives that I was looking for. The one there with the red hood, his job was going to be to scale that wall right ahead of him and claim that vantage point as soon as he could. there was also those other two close combat guys. I was hoping to use them for a combination of one, to potentially sneak a firewall away from my opponent, get a sneaky victory point before going down in a blaze of glory, as well as then from that position, depending what happens, also be a threat to be able to push for plant the beacon, and also just bother the Death Guard by having those operatives in and around where their uplink was going to be. That was something they were going to have to deal with. Last of the units there was my plasma gunner. Originally he was going to be going in the middle, but once I saw how that terrain intersected that part of the board, and I could see from there, I could see the firewalls and the uplinks, I thought, geez, this could be a really good way to get a cheeky shot into my opponent. So I made sure that I put him there. He was the only operative out of all of my team that I kept in the engage order, because I was very confident after checking some firing lines that they wouldn't be able to get a shot on him unless it was on his terms. I then used Strike from Within for one command point to set up my little operative here towards that far corner. I realized after taking this photo, I'd had him a little bit too far away from the terrain that he needed to be, so I shuffled him back, but luckily it didn't have any bigger bearing effect on the game, as he was still able to reach that corner and triangulate. The last of the operatives to get placed down were my icon bearer, my leader, and the heavy stubber. Now they were the bull's head, if you will, to the pincer movement horns on the side. These guys' job was to be the main distraction, push hard through to that center, and be the thing that the Death Guard had to worry about early, while I ran my cultists and everyone else in different positions to cause a bit of trouble and score some early victory points. I was really happy how my deployment went. One, it looked cool, but two, it was also actually very functional. I mean, the main thing that we always know with the Death Guard, they're going to have fewer numbers, so I guess their ability to counter-deploy was going to be relatively limited, and also had a bit of a feeling that their main plan was to do what the Death Guard do really, really well, and that was just push towards that middle of the board and dare me to try to get them off the objectives. And in the spirit of making me look right, the Death Guard did comply with that. They plonked down in a nice big blob there, right in the middle of their deployment zone, with eyeing off those objectives straight away that they wanted to move up. They had Eric Banner, the plasma gun, our good friend Pretty Fly, the leader, and the fighter there. And of course, the reason they really wanted to clump up as well was to make sure that they take maximum advantage of the Plague Bell in that first turn that the leader was carrying, because that can be truly devastating to help move those guys straight up the board. Then came the scouting phase, both selecting 3 to grab that little extra dash at the start of the game. This meant with the Death Guard being the attackers that they would have the initiative. Not the best start, but hey, we'll bounce back. With their dash, the Death Guard pushed their Plague Marine fighter up the board, while I chose to move my Flamer up as well, heading towards that objective in the middle there. The strategy phase was short and sweet, the Death Guard choosing to use malicious volleys, while the Chaos side decided to hold on to those command points for now. Turn 1 started in an unexpected way, not to the sound of battle cries, but to the sound of a bell, as the Death Guard leader rung his plague bell, giving everyone around him that extra bit of movement before himself pushing forward into the middle of the battlefield. To start with, I activated one of my cultists, the first sneaky boy who was out in that far corner by himself. I used him to triangulate that first corner. The second one I used to jump up on the crates to start pushing him across the board to get vantage point in the next turn. The main thing of using the GA2 here, one, obviously get through my activations quickly, but also means that if I'm using my less valuable units, I'm trying to get the Death Guard to show their hand a little bit more, to try and take back a bit of initiative after losing the initiative and having to set up first. The Death Guard icon bearer shuffled his way over to the first of the firewalls and deactivated it, scoring the Death Guard the first victory point of the game. Time for more cultists here. My Flamer shuffled up just behind the cover there and was able to boop the button and deactivate that firewall. I then also snuck up the other cultist there as well, with his mission to get to the other corner for a triangulate later in the game. After a few different looks, the Death Guard fighter decided to sneak up behind the wall there, using the door as a little bit of cover. He was still actually able to claim the objective through the wall there, so some clever little placement. It was also at this point, this is where we actually caught up and realized that you didn't have to get the firewalls each turn. He actually only had to grab them once. So that was the reason why I hadn't have rushed one of my cultists up earlier on the right-hand flank from my deployment zone. I thought it was a battle that you would actually still had to hold them as well and then re-deactivate them each time. Very silly. The rules clearly state that's not true. So that explains why I didn't go for this one a little bit earlier and paid the price right here. It was at this point too, I also noticed my cultists were in the way a little bit. I'd blocked in my plasma gunner and now I needed to get him out of there. So I decided to put that pressure on the middle uplink there by moving my cultists in and under, just straight away giving my opponent something to think about. It said also could be a good way to draw that Plague Marine Warrior out into a charge where he could get counter-charged or something like that. It also got him out of the way of the Plasma Gunner, so I was actually able to move him into a dangerous spot in the next activation. For the GA2, I also grabbed another cultist and moved him up the top there, and this was to be able to give him the ability to do vantage point next turn. But to sort that out, I'd have to also make sure that I cleared away any guys who could potentially get in with that circle distance to cancel that out. Pretty Fly then moved to the center of the board there, and you can see again the benefit of moving to an aerial shot here, and you can see the benefit of that extra circle of movement. It's just shown how quickly we've pushed the Death Guard from their deployment zone to really already nearly dominating that middle of the battlefield. It's true, I haven't put as many operatives in there. I've been working those flanks. But if you are a Death Guard player, it shows how much this can really, really help you and really put you in a strong position early before you do need to start spreading out a little bit more. With the Humble Cultist shuffled out of the way, I was able to move my Plasma Gunner into a really dangerous position and get some damage done. As you can see by the roll, he rolled very, very well after flanking the Death Guard fighter there. Unfortunately, the big thing here was this was always going to be a bit of a trade-off. By the time I moved there, which operative did I want to kill? And then also, was I prepared for the counterfire? Because the Death Guard had, as of yet, not moved their Plasma Gunner. Maybe a little bit of hindsight, I could have waited to see what he did with the Plasma Gunner and seen with a bit of careful positioning if I could have avoided the coming counter-attack. But I really wanted to get that model down because each model the Death Guard loses is really, really going to limit their ability to win the game. So you take the kills you can get, and of course a close combat fighter off objectives that you want to put models on is always a win. As predicted, the Death Guard response was quick and vicious with some plasma on plasma violence. Their Plasma Gunner was able to move into position and shoot at mine. Luckily for him, at first, he was going to be surviving on 1 wound, which I thought was a huge win. A bit of poor rolling by the Death Guard there. They did spend the CP though to take another shot, and this time around it worked for them. With that last activation, the Death Guard were now heading into Overwatch for all future activations for them. So a little bit of careful planning, I'd be able to stay out of their way and have my 3 turns consecutively. So to start with, I just shuffled one of my cultists down that right hand side flank from my deployment zone. Again, putting more pressure on those objectives on that side of the board. Also possibly to use as a late charge if I needed to get a plant the beacon or something if the other flank failed. I also shuffled my stubber to the other side of the crane there to give him a good firing lane straight down the middle of the battlefield, which gave me a good eye line on the uplink as well. So hopefully I might be able to put a little bit of pressure on any Death Guard units hoping to camp out there. My leader and my icon bearer were the last 2 to move. They just shuffled over towards the uplink and the firewall, still remaining on my side. I wasn't actually going to be able to get that last firewall this turning point. I was okay with that. I was very confident I was going to be able to snag it very early in the next turn. And that's the end of turning point 1. We quickly tallied the points up. The Death Guard scored another 2 because they were in control of their uplink and had deactivated both firewalls from that. We looked at strategic ploys for the next turn, both players deciding not to use any, saving those precious command points for the right moment. Rolling for initiative, the Chaos Space Marines took the chocolates here and will get to activate first. So the priority here was to make sure that I got that last of the firewall objectives off the board as soon as possible. So I activated my leader, sent him over there with a bit of a move and a dash and his last AP disconnect the final firewall. This does mean the middle of the battlefield is really the only way to score big points. So I'm hoping now with the next few activations and a few more moves to get maybe 1 more Death Guard Marine down, and that's really going to leave them with only 3 models left and make it very hard for them to push up on the battlefield and keep pressure on both objectives. The Death Guard leader, true to form, rang his bell again before heading up closer to my, uplink objective. He was obviously wanting to bring that plasma gun and the power fist to bear, so he's a pretty potent warrior there, and something that was definitely giving me a bit of concern in terms of how I was going to be able to deal with him. I really needed to use my leader to take him out without it happening the other way, so working out a way to get the counterpunch in here was going to be very important. It was now time to grab a few more of my TacOps. Those secondaries were really part of my plan here of minimizing theirs and getting mine to maybe squeak away with a win here. I really couldn't have the victory points differential get too far away from me. So with that in mind, my Cultist up on the first vantage point quickly claimed that. I then moved my second Cultist with the GA2 up to the second vantage point that I'd claim next turn. So hopefully a couple of points coming my way very soon. The inevitable push onto my uplink console begun here with Pretty Fly pushing right up to the window there to basically negate the heavy cover that my banner bearer was hiding behind. He took a lot of shots, and with obviously the extra equipment he had as well, he was able to do quite a bit of damage to my poor icon bearer, which was putting some of my plans into a little bit of disarray. I still had some things I wanted to do with him and how I was going to score some points this turn. So a little bit of a brutal blow there. I definitely miscalculated again the power of the bell. The Plague Bell was actually what enabled him to have that extra movement, and I definitely didn't account for that. So definitely hurt me here. I think there's an old saying, the best laid plans never survive contact with the enemy. So I had to pivot a little bit here, but luckily you've always got to have plans within plans. So I slid my Flamer up to that same window and used him as a bit of a counterattack on that Marine. I was hoping to use the Flamer to damage the Death Guard Marine on that objective, and then use my Icon Bearer to shoot and finish him off, or failing that, charge him and take that objective using the Icon Bearer's ability to have one more APL in terms of counting towards capturing an objective. That was my plan here, and the Flamer, hey, this is probably the best roll I've ever seen on a Flamer. The only disappointing thing was that the Death Guard player, like all their rolls, continued to roll disgustingly well and blocked a lot of the criticals on the Flamer. So still 4 damage through. He did fail all the disgustingly resilience, so I'll take that as a little bit of a win. And now that point's getting very, very interesting. My other operative here, I took my second Cultist in the GA2 and really pushed him up hard on that flank. So he's really going for that plant signal beacon because I really want those 2 victory points from that TacOp as well. Every counter, there is another counter, and the Plasma Gunner from the Death Guard was no exception here. He was able to counter against the Flamer, who'd revealed himself in that window and fired across the battlefield, and surprisingly, didn't kill the Cultist. I'm sure he's pretty crispy, but he managed to survive with 2 wounds there. So a little bit of a get out of jail free card. The Plasma Gunner also decided to stay put, and I'm assuming this was to make sure that he gets some overwatch and hold the middle of the battlefield for the Death Guard. With the turning point quickly approaching the end, I really needed to hold up this bottom left corner of the Death Guard team. I needed to stop them getting too many operatives into the middle, especially on towards my uplink, but even protecting their own, I needed to make them think twice about advancing away from it. To this end, I charged in one of my Cultists to the Banner Bearer, not hoping to kill him, but just hoping to tie him up in the combat, hoping that that might at least mean that he has to waste an APL to kill my guy before he can be engaged. He promptly killed my guy in 1 round of combat though, so that plan failed a little bit. It put the pressure back on me here, and I had one more Cultist objective on that side that I could take advantage with GA2. This operative, originally the plan with him was to push and plant the signal beacon on their deployment zone. But with a number of Marines having held back on this side, I didn't actually think he was going to be able to do that. It obviously costs 2 APL, so I need to get him up into position, hide him for a turn, and then do it in the next turn. So I made the controversial slash possibly right decision, and then used the scramble over charge tactic over the terrain there to wiggle over that and charge the Banner Bearer, again with the same intention to tie him up so he wasn't going to be able to engage as much with the rest of the battlefield. Luckily, this time the Cultist survived, and now the Death Guard player will have to spend that APL to finish him off before he can do anything else on the battlefield. The Cultist, after surviving 1 round of combat, was quickly Donkey Kong punched on the top of their head and finished off. This did allow the Banner Bearer now to move forward into the ruins there. He also could draw a line of sight on the other Cultist who'd been lurking in there as well, and he promptly popped his head off as well. So my plan to hold this Icon Bearer back hadn't gone 100% according to plan. At least it hadn't allowed him to push all the way up the battlefield. I was starting to lose Cultists very, very quick. Who would have thought 5-up saves don't keep them around for too long, and charging Death Guard Marines isn't the smartest of ideas. I had a plan here though. I had obviously taken quite a bit of damage off the Icon Bearer. He'd now moved up and was definitely someone I could shoot. So using a sneaky little dash to reposition my gunner here from the Cultists to make that he was going to have a little bit of extra cover by being back from further terrain, but finagling the eye lines a little bit. Originally I wanted to shoot at the leader through the gap. I could see some of him hanging out, but couldn't get the correct firing lines because of the heavy terrain in front of me. So I took those shots at the Icon Bearer, hoping to take away those last 6 wounds, but unfortunately, being a cultist with a heavy weapon, he missed everything. The Death Guard moved into Overwatch here, and the Plasma Gunner, clearly inspired by that shooting display by the cultists, followed suit, shooting at the Flamer down the range and managed to do no wounds with a plasma gun. Should not be possible, but here we are. We'll take that little bit of luck. So the final move of this turning point, and it was a pretty crucial one. My plan here using the Icon Bearer was to clear off that Plague Marine off there, take control of that objective, so making sure that I was scoring points, my enemy wasn't scoring more. Ideally, I would like to do this purely with shooting and then have my Icon Bearer still be, in the mix for the next turn. So to help achieve that, I started by using 1 APL to activate his Icon of Vengeance, which means if I retain any criticals, I could upgrade a miss to a regular hit. So pretty handy. And then combining that with Belt Feed and Malefic Rounds, I thought I should have no issue annihilating that operative. It was not the case. He survived with 3 wounds left. This left me with just 1 APL, so my only real option here was to charge in to tie up that operative, to take that objective away by having technically more APL on that objective. The fallback here was now, if I didn't get initiative in the next turn, he was nearly guaranteed to be dead, as he only had a few wounds left. We'll have to see how the dice favour us in the next turn. So turning point 2 came to an end, and it was time to tally up the points we'd both gained. The Death Guard managed to snag one for damage limitation, as Death Guard do. They're hard to kill, so fair call taking that one. They also took 2 for controlling the uplink on their side of the board. For myself, I gained another 2 for controlling the uplink that I had. In some ways, it was a really good turn for the Chaos Space Marines. We did manage to make sure that that lead didn't grow out, but we didn't make much ground back, and we were starting to look a little bit leaner on the ground. 1 Chaos Space Marine dead, 1 severely wounded, and a very good chance he was going to be dead very early in the next turn. And the cultists' numbers, which is their strong point, were starting to thin out. The next turning point and some of the key things such as initiative and what I could do with my leader were really going to give us an idea if I could reel this game back or not. As the initiative dice clattered into the dice tray, unfortunately for the Chaos Space Marines, they didn't get it this time. This did lead to, predictably some might say, the close combat kicking off with the Death Guard player dispatching his foe over the objective marker there. Suddenly things were looking a little bit uphill for the Chaos Space Marines, but that Plague Marine wasn't done yet. He then used his last remaining APL to shoot my Flamer in the face and then shuffle back safely onto the objective and maximize his use of heavy cover to protect himself from further retribution. I was firmly into damage control mode here, and now it wasn't just about me scoring my secondary objectives. I also had to make sure my opponent couldn't score his. He had surprised me by actually going security. I was assuming in my mind, due to past games and the way that he was probably going to play the game, that he was going to go seek and destroy. So when he did reveal security and what comes along with that, it definitely wrong-footed me a little bit. I was definitely going to have to put into my plans how to counter some of his ability to score late game. To start with though, I concentrated on my objectives and quickly activated one of my cultists to do the second victory point for Vantage. Then with my second operative, who was up on the original Vantage point, I shuffled him in such a way that he wasn't going to be able to be charged by any of the Death Guard models very easily. They were really going to have to go out of their way to get him, and that was really going to hurt them on their chances to get seize ground at the end of the game. The Death Guard Icon Bearer was in a great spot in the middle of the battlefield there, and after a little bit of shuffling was able to control the objective and fire at my heavy stubber down the line there, which I thought I'd position in such a way that this wasn't possible. Does pay to double check all your firing lines, guys, that's for sure. He took his shot and managed to take 5 wounds off the stubber. Luckily for me though, he did survive. My gunner didn't need much more motivation than that to quickly sneak into cover. I actually did have a plan with him here. Now he wasn't going to be an effective offensive threat. I was now going to use him to get to that bit of terrain where my opponent was hoping to do seize ground to really limit his ability to score any points on that at the end of the game. With the second GA2 operative there, I shuffled my cultist to the end of the battlefield there, you can see, and hit him in the terrain. He was basically in conceal, and he was within pentagon of the enemy deployment zone, so next turn he was now perfectly positioned to do plant the signal beacon. The game was definitely heading to crunch time here, and there wasn't too many operatives left to be activated, and there wasn't too many targets that weren't hidden in cover. So to maximise his potential damage for the last turn and to force me into a little bit of a corner, the Death Guard General moved the plasma gun up into a dangerous position which enabled him to have some cover, but also to cover those two objectives that he's hoping to be holding at the end of the game. It was really boxing me in a bit with what I could do to my leader, really forcing me into a box and giving my leader more targets than he could kill in a turn. So it was time for the all-important charge of my leader and what I could possibly do in this situation to maximize the damage I could do to my opponents and also clearing them off that objective. I really couldn't afford for them to score this, and there was only one possible way after doing my best to rack my brain of all the possible outcomes to do this. To start with, I dashed my leader around the corner so he was able to see the enemy icon bearer and promptly plasmed his face off. Mission 1 was complete. After that, I then used a normal move to head back around behind the doorway of the objective. Now, I wasn't actually able to hold the objective through this doorway, but again, I did make a big mistake here. I assumed on the Death Guard's ability to charge only a certain difference, forgetting for about the 14th time in this battle about the power of the bell, of course, that magical bell, and it really undid my plans. Basically, what I was hoping would happen is that the leader operative would have to move into the danger zone to hold the objective for this turn. There probably wasn't much I could do to stop him taking that, but hopefully next turn I'd gain the initiative, I'd be able to charge the leader, kill him, and then possibly even follow up into the plasma gun as well. And all of a sudden that's 2 operatives dead, and then being able to have that extra follow up as well, that I might even be able to capture both objectives through some miracle, or at very least change the narrative of the game and put myself on the attacking. I could look at where some of my cultists were positioned. Could they get to objectives? It really would have changed how the next part played out. Unfortunately, that damn bell meant he could charge me directly through the door and hold the objective. All wasn't lost. I was actually still quite confident that my leader could beat his. I did have the extra equipment that took away one of his attacks. I had Grizzly Trophy to heal up afterwards if I could win. A lethal 5+, 5 attacks hitting on 2s. But we've always got to remember, this is a dice game. And I managed to roll 3 1s in my attacks. Not only that, I didn't manage to roll any criticals even after a CP reroll. So I really had put myself hard up against it here. I was really relying very heavily on lethal 5+, granting me the ability to parry some of those power fist blows and limit his ability to kill me very quickly. Without those criticals, unfortunately, I got some hits in, but I was smushed into a beautiful, fine paste. That had been a really rough turn. At the end of the turn there, the Death Guard get another 4 victory points because they now control both uplink markers. And to be honest, I don't think there's going to be much I can do about that in the next turn either. They've got a lot of Death Guard bodies, and by that I mean 3, still alive, still with quite high wounds, all things considered, with things like disgustingly resilient. And I just didn't have any big heavy hitters left. All of my Marines are now dead. So really, again, it comes back to chasing my own TacOps and limiting my opponents. Them still having damage limitation, I'd done a pretty good job so far of not losing operatives around the objective, so they were going to struggle with that. I was also doing a good job too with seize ground. I think I was going to be able to either nullify at least one of those points by the end of the game. And for myself, I knew that I did have another triangulate coming, and I also did have plant the signal beacon as well. So I don't know if it's going to be enough, but you always play through to the end. Things started off well enough, gaining the initiative for the Chaos Space Marines, but as we know, Turning Point 4 doesn't usually have that much action, and this was no exception. My Chaos Cultist gunner ran across the battlefield there with a move and a dash just to stay close enough to that objective to make sure that seize ground was not going to be an option for my opponent. I then also just shuffled the guy up the top once more, very boringly, to make sure that he couldn't be charged to clear him off that as well. After surveying the battlefield very thoroughly, the Death Guard leader decided there wasn't much else he could do but start to consolidate objectives. So he just shuffled on fully onto that objective just to make sure that no pot shots from anyone else could accidentally take away his last 5 wounds. The Chaos Cultists took their last chance to get some spiteful points at the end. The Cultist on the crates was able to wiggle down and was able to get us triangulate on the top right corner for a victory point. The last cultist who'd worked his behind off all game to get into position to plant that signal beacon finally had the opportunity to do it to score another 2 victory points for the Chaos Space Marines. For the final move of the game, the plasma gunner shuffled and ambled his way back towards that seize ground objective. Basically, this meant that they secured 1 victory point for that, but they didn't get the second one because I had managed to get those 2 cultists on there. So, not a terrible result. And that was the end of the game there. The Death Guard were able to get their final 2 points they could score on the main objective. So they got that and maxed that out at 12. There also was 1 more victory point for them as well for not losing another operative at the end of the game there. So a pretty decisive victory in the end for them, finishing on 15 points to the Chaos Space Marines 9. The game definitely felt a lot closer than the scores dictate, and I don't know what else I really could have done or what big moves I could have made. Once we picked the teams, my options were relatively limited, and I feel like my game plan was good. I just feel like at a couple of clutch, crucial moments, things didn't quite go my way. The Death Guard player also played the game really, really well, played to their strengths, and definitely minimized my ability to control those main objectives through the middle. So that's it. Another battle in the books. It was a really, really good game. Dan, the Death Guard General, played them really well, played the Death Guard to their strengths. There wasn't much I think I could do. Chaos Cultists are Chaos Cultists, and I'm fingers crossed in the new box set when that comes out. Opposite the Corsairs, hopefully we see some new Chaos Cultist models or Chaos Space Marines, and that there is some form of synergy or something that really makes them a much better option, a bit more specialty or strategic tactical ploys you can use to make them a little bit better, because they're just a little bit underwhelming at the moment, and that's fine. That was still super fun to play with. I love thematically getting them on the board. I love having teams with lots and lots of models. I love having lots of options to keep my opponent guessing. But there's some teams that care not for how many models you've got. And Death Guard is probably one of them. As always, I really appreciate all the feedback. So please, if you're enjoying these battle reports, please chuck it below. If there's any ways you think I can make them better or more enjoyable for the viewer yourselves, let me know as well. I really want to keep tweaking these. These are a work in progress. I want to make them as entertaining and as interesting and as fun to watch / listen to while you paint, while you hobby, because that's what I kind of think these are great to do. You know, you can sort of watch them, but you can also just listen along and get a really good idea and feel for what's happening in the battles. And also, yeah, share your tactical ideas down below. Share your thoughts. Share what teams you'd love to see. Let me know what battles you want me to line up next, and I'll do my best. As always, like, subscribe, get involved. I really want to build a big community. There's a lot of really, really cool Kill Team content creators out there, and I just want to make sure we keep sharing that hobby and community love amongst Kill Team, because it's been amazing so far. So thank you for the support. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time on Threes to Wound. My name's Reese.